I would just, well, this is all exciting. My hands are getting sweaty when everyone's speaking, because I think what the dialogue that's opening up is so necessary here, and I think it will bring a lot of healing to Antioch, and I think it will build our community. You know, I think it's really important. But in the social dreaming, there is a thing about truth, and you were just talking about space. A space between knowing and not knowing results in learning may provoke anxiety because of the uncertainty and the sense of loss of competency.
Sure. Oh, for sure.
And you know, for me, going into traineeship and then internship, of course, I had that feeling. But in any dialogue, and with my husband, we were coming together. It took 6 years, but he's from El Salvador. He was there during the Civil War and all that, the colonization that took place, and the racism, and really a hatred for many white people. And then we fell in love, and I have anger at men because of the sexism I went through as a woman. So we would have this dialogue, and it would get very heated, but we worked through it, and we kept working through it, and it ended up being, you know, it's quite beautiful. Not that it doesn't, you know, the complexes don't come up now and then, they do, but we're much calmer in the discussions.
The competency issue is a big issue. Of course, the more education, you know, more competency, and if you have your degrees on your wall and you're doing therapy, and people are paying you. I mean, money is a strong indicator of a lot of things, value, but also competency. And I think we feel that quite a bit. Somebody's paying us to know. And, you know, and it could be particularly if somebody has a typology. I think Doug and I probably have the same typology, sort of thinking type, extrovert, intuitive. And although we're very different, but in typology, I think we're probably the same. I mean, he said that. I'm not outing him. I'm outing myself. Well, that's not a surprise. The thinking part. But that thinking part is wrapped up a lot with competency and so on. And so your inferior function, this is another kind of tool of contemplation in Jungian psychology, is to recognize that what's closer to your soul is really your inferior function, and that's your more vulnerable part. But it's also a resource, it's your stronger resource. It's the treasure house in a way. So I often think, especially even among the Jungians constantly criticize thinking types. They're cut off from the head and all that typical stuff. However, then I tell them, I said, well, I'd much rather be a thinking type that had my soul and feeling than whatever it is you have by being a feeling type and have a thinking soul. And then they're like, but that's the one opposite to consider, is that it's not that a person doesn't have feeling when their competency is challenged, but the challenge of the competency can sometimes help a person sort of drop into their feeling too, often negatively. I mean, that was kind of a smart-ass thing to say, and that's kind of a feeling sort of response, a defensive response, but or humoring, trying to please the other, you know. But you know, there is an opportunity. Well, it's not really an opportunity. You're kind of forced down into feeling when people challenge your first function and that competency and so on. So each of these things that trigger us can also be related to typology, also, which we haven't really talked about. Yeah.
It's also a way to equalize the power.
Sure.
Because I also think that it's disingenuous for us to assume that just because we have an egalitarian attitude about therapy, that the power differential isn't there.
No.
Because it certainly is.
Right.
We have to be aware of that.
Oh, and just physically too. I mean, I work with kids and little kids, and I'm just a huge, like, beast, right? And so you have to recognize all these different things. So you can be the most gentle kind of person and philosophically open and everything like that, but it's how we present also in our body and our energy, and just to be, you know, aware of those things and how they're coming through, and to be able to, as Doug said again earlier today, invite that in. Like, how are you feeling right now? Is it coming? Just this, not to challenge the defense, but to invite the defense exploration through it.
Yeah, I think one of the chapters in here doesn't deal with the cultural complex around our field, in the field as clinicians, right? So it kind of behooves us to be kind of looking at that constantly.
Oh, you had mentioned that you work with children, because I do as well, and I find myself a little stressed because they are special needs, severe behavioral, and they're escalated, and I don't know what to do. They're, you know, going within their body, they're totally flooded, and our supervisors just say, well, just sit there. They were all like,
Yeah.
well, we want to do something. We want to. What do we do? What do we do? Do we
Yeah. What do you,
pull out the crayons? Do we, you know, what do we
Yeah.
do? And I find myself always kind of at odds in what are the next steps to take besides just being there as a source of presence. So I was curious how you.
Yeah, well, it
appreciate
just occurs to me, I don't know what other people think, but if there's a lot of energy that needs to get out, then play. I mean,
Right.
you got to move it.
Right.
I mean, it's not going to help to talk about it. Kids don't talk.
No.
Want to talk anyway.
No,
So
right.
that's the whole problem with school is that they have to sit. That's why they have ADHD problems. They're not,
Right.
ADHD has its own issues, but it's particularly an issue in school.
Right.
So if you can't recognize where energy is going and help a person channel it in that way, then there has to be a hard block on it, and then it's going to come out in the behavior you see.
Right.
And so if you can follow the Tao of the energy there, I mean, physically that's the thing to do, and that's the time to put the agenda, the typical therapy agendas away, and to find. It's a problem with the environment and the container, not a problem with the kid.
Right.
Uh,
No, you're right. It's a non-public school, so. You know.
Yeah, I work in a non-public school too.
Right, so it's good.
It's, you know,
Yeah.
yes.
Mark, you have talked a lot about, somewhat about the difficulty of moving into a group, the difficulty of, it's more challenging to be in a group when one does not know oneself very well, or is strong within oneself, because one will tend to take on the dynamic or the collective more easily.
Yeah.
And I am sitting here thinking of the body of Antioch and how wonderful and creative and intelligent and all these things and all these wonderful intentions for the collective. But as we move out into the world, or dare I say the real world, because this is a room full of intelligent people, sort of, right? Could you talk a little bit about Jung in terms of the collective and the individual? And I, for one, am asking about the word ego, because as I understand it, when you talk about bipolar propensities, it's the stronger ego to hold the tensions, to be able to hold the tensions. It takes a stronger ego to be able to do that, and that is part of the job of bearing witness and the analyst and so on and so forth. And I just was wondering how you both, really, Thomas and Mark, how you both felt about that in terms of the individual and the group, the collective, because we're talking about the cultural collective here as well.
I think they're constantly getting mixed together, right? I mean, I think there's, and I think that's what's so valuable about this, again, the cultural complex. It lets us find a way to deal with it psychodynamically in a Jungian way, rather than put it all into the individual. If it's all about the individual, intrapsychic dynamics. So I think what this lets us do is address both in a unique, powerful way.
Feels like you're talking about something very different, I guess is what I'm trying to say, than the collective.
Yes.
In a way.
Yeah.
Different level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's disciplines that we can do, like working out or meditation, in terms of just being able to find a place where you can get grounded when a storm comes, like when you feel tsunamis coming, pirate run, whatever. But I think as therapists, you kind of find that out more, and you figure out what works for you in terms to be able to hold your space and to be able to still be open to the thing, also in a collective. I mean, it's dealing with traumas of taking on trauma, like vicarious trauma. I mean, I don't know. The one thing that comes to mind in terms of vicarious trauma is just to tell you all something I just heard recently about vicarious trauma that I think is useful, is that we listen to a lot of trauma. We take in a lot of trauma, and we try to open ourselves to that. We try to remain open. And there's a research project of interviewing people, doing assessment on people just for symptoms related to trauma, post-trauma symptoms, without asking questions about what the cause of it was and so on. And so they were interviewing people who were clinicians and had no trauma experience, no direct personal trauma experience, but a lot of vicarious trauma, and then people who had trauma experience. And there was no difference clinically in terms of assessment, in terms of the symptoms that this group of people had, which is pretty eye-opening. I'm sort of telling everybody about this now because just to be able to see the cost of the work and how it takes it. So in other words, even if we haven't had trauma, and we all have had different circumstances, we want to access that and become rooted in that. But also to recognize that just being in the trauma field of people we're working with is causing symptoms, potentially causing symptoms. What is causing symptoms in us too? And we tend to think that we're not. That probably gets into various personal complexes we have of just being, just taking it, or whatever it is, go into that. But I think that's one way of relating between the individual, as we all are individuals, and how we got in the collective, particularly in our work as therapists, is that we are taking on the trauma of the group, the kids, and whoever we work with. So I don't know if that's responsive.
So I know where we're going to probably need to
Yes.
transition. So thank you both very much.